Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Brett Eldredge, titled Illinois. So one of the trends I probably haven't given the same time of day to in mainstream country, at least in the show, is the slow trickling in of more R&B influences. It's not all that surprising to me, given the huge growth of R&B on pop radio, but as soon as Jason Aldean's Burn It Down was a huge hit, it didn't surprise me that so many others would gun for a similar sound and just jump on the bandwagon. And like with the bro country bandwagon, I'm more conflicted than outright negative toward this slicker, more metropolitan brand of country music. On the one hand, the increased usage of drum machines tends to irk me because it can lead to sloppier, more groove-lacking records like Sam Hunt's Montevallo or Luke Bryan's Kill the Lights. Even the modern association with hip-hop, I can see why most country puritans would recoil away from R&B. But on the other hand, if handled well, the more spacey sound can lead to solely melodic, more groove-driven albums. I might not have loved Billy Currington's last record, Summer Forever, or Dustin Lynch's Where It's At, because I being one of the few people who actually remember those albums exist. I also remember there being cuts I liked from each of them. Even though the Zac Brown band's Jekyll and Hyde was a genre-bending mess, there were experiences that did work off of that album. What I'm ultimately trying to say is that while I get the antipathy from country purists, especially with this material clogging up the mainstream country radio, riding the trends with room for little else, this isn't that far removed conceptually from, say, the vintage pop that Lindy Ortega or Whitney Rose pull from, nor the psychedelic rock for Sturgill Simpson or the more progressive rock tendencies from that last Jason Isbell record. Let's just be consistent here, that's all I'm asking. As such, I wasn't certain what to expect with the sophomore record from Brett Eldredge called Illinois. Early buzz is suggesting he was going more towards that metropolitan sound, most thanks to the backing of producer Russ Copperman, who did a lot of excellent production work on Dierks Bentley's last album. But I'll say, at the presence of Thomas Rhett as a guest star, the poster child for calling his brand of vintage pop R&B garbage country music did not raise my spirits. But on the other hand, Brett Eldredge, he's a good songwriter with a distinctive voice, and I really did love the warped melodies against the acoustic grooves of Lose My Mind, his lead-off single, and I hope this could at least be salvaged. So, what did we get? Well, honestly, I was expecting this album to be a lot worse than it is, because Illinois by Brett Eldredge is not that bad. Is it great or even good? No. It's too messy, sloppily produced, lacking cohesion and great songwriting to rise to any level of respectable quality, but it's not that terrible, and I think the difference in my judgment comes in that I'm not really slotting this as anything beyond some overly synthetic pop country and evaluating it on that level. And on that level, it's less of a genre-bending atrocity than a mildly disappointing sophomore slump with a few good songs and a lot of interchangeable filler. Hell, even though I consider this a stretch to consider all this country music, I will say it's more country than the last album Luke Bryan dropped, even though that's really not saying much. In other words, it's not very good, but it's far from an atrocity. It's not that bad. But where to even start with this? Okay, probably the best place would be the one unequivocal positive, Brett Eldredge himself. If it wasn't for his immediately recognizable baritone, this album would be a lot worse, because he's got a lot of emotive presence and versatility behind the microphone, spanning some sincerity, lightweight beach fodder, and even some darker, more twisted moments. Like Kip Moore ahead of him, even if the subject matter is pretty inconsequential, Brett Eldredge can do a fair bit to elevate it with his delivery, and that is saying something for him as a performer. But this is where the problems start in earnest, because unlike Kip Moore, nobody in the production booth had the slightest idea how to produce for Brett Eldredge's vocals effectively, because the production and really most of the instrumentation is a complete mess. Forget the fact that the majority of this album can't decide if they want to use drum machines or real drums, which leads to a mishmash of styles that only works maybe a third of the time. Forget the electric guitar tones that often feel way too weedy and thin to support Eldredge's richer vocals. The vocal layering itself is often completely mishandled, and it starts from the very first song, Fire, where the backing vocals feel oddly clipped on the chorus and they just feel poorly mixed. And it doesn't end there either. The sloppy mixing on Time Well Spent, the painfully thin backing vocals and If You Were My Girl and Just a Taste. And then there's Shadow. Oh, well, I'm sorry, that song's a disaster from top to bottom, with the percussion being way too clean and mixed too high, the guitars having nowhere near enough smolder to match the pianos of all things, and the lo-fi filters slathered all over Eldredge's voice in order to desperately add some grit that the song just doesn't have. It's an attempt at rough-edged country rock, maybe in the vein of Eric Church's Outsiders, as not only feels completely out of place on this album, but it flatters nobody. It's not convincing at all. The one place where the vocal multi-tracking was even close to flattering was on Drunk on Your Love, but even that is really pushing it. But unfortunately, the problems run even deeper than that, mostly because as slick and as cool as this album is trying to sell itself, Brett Eldredge isn't all that believable in that role. Thomas Rhett maybe, but even though his guest verse on You Can't Stop Me is completely empty, it at least fits better against this sound than Eldredge shouting TR, which is just embarrassing. You're not a rapper, dude. That's not even saying the more synthetic song was a complete deal breaker either. Lose My Mind's off-kilter melodies with the acoustic groove, the spacier guitars and pianos, and even hints of steel guitar in the background of the title track and Wanna Be That Song, the uses of accordion to fill out the background on Drunk on Your Love, the melancholic vibe of Lose It All. These are songs that can play to Eldredge's tones and have some good melodies on their own. But even then, the instrumental cohesion really isn't helped by the too slick island-inspired elements on Time Well Spent or Going Away for a While that seem to be trying to recall Jake Owen's Beachin', but really don't have the same control of their atmosphere or texture to really match it. But then again, texture might as well be a foreign word on this album, because with the exception of some of the acoustic grooves, this album feels surprisingly sterile, with no real fire in the guitars, and even in the underweight drum machines, there just isn't a lot here to really support it and hold up in terms of driving momentum. So with all that being said, what saves this album from being worse? Well, arguably, it's the lyrics. They might not be excellent, but Eldredge remains a capable enough songwriter to not fall into the same nonsense that can ruin most bro country records. For one, he often plays to his sincere earnestness, which means that songs like Wanna Be That Song, and If You Were My Girl, or Just a Taste, or Drunk on Your Love, they're straightforwardly likable enough to rise above some boring mediocrity. And conceptual songs like the How to Ruin Your Relationship track, Lose It All, show a lot of nuance in how carelessness can do far more damage than one might think to a relationship. And as I said before, I really like how well the careening momentum of Lose My Mind plays against the lyrics that are just as unstable. It really works well. And hell, I found a lot to like about the title track as well. A tribute to his home state, Illinois, that does seem to come from the heart, but also reveals the one glaring issue with the majority of the writing on this album: how general and unspecific it felt. This is a song that you could have used to capture details about your home state to paint more of a picture, and yet it feels maddeningly unspecific that any other country song could do. And in most cases, I'd understand this, but this is the guy who wrote songs so vividly detailed, like Raymond, that told greater stories. And I have to say it, Brett Eldredge, you can do better than this. And that, if anything, told me more about what this album is. It's a stab towards mainstream relevance that fits onto a slicker sound and vibe to fit into pop radio. The problem is that beyond his unique vocal tone and personality, the slick sounds are an ill fit for Brett Eldredge, and the writing that used to give him more definition and personality as a performer has kind of ebbed away. And outside of Lose My Mind and maybe the title track, I find this album kind of hard to recommend for either pop fans or country fans alike. For me, it's a strong 5 out of 10, and only really recommend it if you're a fan or you think the smoother sound somehow works for him. For me, well, the jury's still out on whether or not I like metropolitan country, but I think the list of artists that it works for is a very slim one. And as for Illinois tributes, I think I'll stick with Sufjan Stevens. Yet somehow, that album feels more organic than this. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Yes, I know there's a lot of albums that you probably want me to take a look at. There's just a lot on that list. But we'll see what happens. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.